Hello ladies and gentlemen, this video is about forts, and specifically how various weapons interact with armor. I hope this will be useful. Let's start with the, armor-piercing snipers. Let's see how well they do what they say they're gonna do. Well, that's a good start. Against a piece of armor that was slanted a little bit, it just passed right through. Now, if the armor is a lot sharper, like 45 degrees, the shot still passes right through. So if the slant is much sharper than that, then it's finally stopped. The bullet doesn't actually deflect off, it just travels through more of the metal and it eventually stops. Now, slope is relative, which means that even against a really sharp slope, if a sniper attacks from above, it can still pass right through. Now, this does mean that even if a particular piece of armor is not sloped sharply enough, a sniping attack from below can still bounce off. Like so. Well, unless the sniper is attacking from really far below, in which case it can shoot through the floor. I think that just about covers it for the snipers. Now let's take a look at Gatling guns. Now, Gatling guns are, unlike machine guns, basically made to deal damage to forts. Yeah, that 3 salvos took an armor piece down to a little less than 1/4 health, which naturally means that if you use 4 of them, well, you'll take down a piece of armor in really short order. Eagle Eye might be able to do it with 3 because of the tighter spread, although that also depends on map distance. Also, 3 gatlings left unopposed can destroy a piece of armor faster than it can be repaired. So, if you get sniper superiority, you can probably end a game just by continuous gatling fire. You don't need a cannon or anything like that. Well, let's talk about the next upgraded armor. I'd say it's about 1 or 1.5 tiers ahead, which is the heavy mortar. Well, that had a fairly interesting effect, which is that it destroyed the bracing below, keeping the armor up. But that wasn't so useful for seeing how it would, directly destroy a piece of armor. But that is an effect to keep in mind. That was actually something I didn't expect to happen, but I think it's pretty useful knowledge. Right. So, that's the first thing. The AoE of heavy mortar can destroy things that are behind a piece of armor. So 2 shots reduced it to about 1/4. And if one of them hadn't missed, it would have clearly demonstrated that 2 mortars can destroy a piece of armor faster than most commanders are able to repair them. So let's demonstrate with 3 mortars. Unfortunately, the scatter shot on the mortars makes it really hard to hit all 3 of them on the same armor piece. But if you can manage to get them through on a pose, that barely seems to matter. It's pretty clear that heavy mortars can score a base kill if left alone long enough, which once again makes sniper superiority very important. If you can take out their machine gunners, you can basically destroy their base before factories even come into play. Now, going back to gatlings, there is one thing that I neglected to mention: armor slopes. Now, this armor is only barely sloped, but the bullets bounced right off. However, once again, slope is relative. So an attack from even a little bit above damages the armor just fine. Sloping the armor more makes it, of course, more difficult to damage it by attacking from above or below, depending on the slope. So keep that in mind when building your base. Finally, let's take a look at the factory weapons. Now, I have a few pieces of practice armor here. One that's flat against this cannon here, and one that's sharply sloped against it. Right, so against the sharply sloped armor, it destroyed one piece of it, and damaged the other one to about halfway. Now, as soon as the cannon reloads, we'll see what happens if the armor is basically flat. Thank you for your patience, by the way. In that case, it once again is stopped by the second piece. However, the second piece is reduced to about, less than 1/4 instead of half. So armor slope does have an effect, it's just not nearly as strong an effect as it does on gatlings, for example. Now, lasers do not seem to have any kind of damage reduction by sloped armor, but let's see how much it burns through in one full shot. So it looks like it burned through 2 pieces. There were originally 4 here. It dealt a little bit of damage to the third piece, and of course it set things on fire. And I think that's a fairly interesting balance, because the laser cannon is more fragile and it costs more energy to fire, of course, and it can be deflected by shields, which maybe I'll cover some other time. But it's tough to beat the damage, and it ignores slopes completely. Alright, I think that's about it for now. I hope this was helpful to some of you. Good luck with your forts, and shoot for the cores. I'd like to talk about a few things that were not brought up earlier in the video here. One of which is the structural properties of armor. It is, of course, the heaviest thing you can put on your fort, and puts the most stress on it. It's also very expensive compared to wood, and can set back your technology and weapons building if you don't use it sparingly. However, it is also more structurally sound than wood is, so if you notice that some of your load-bearing struts are glowing bright red, you can replace them with armor and make your fort last a bit longer. I also recommend putting an extra layer of it in front of the core. You always start with 2 armor layers, but that won't stop some of the really heavy weapons in the game. Armor is also very slow to repair, so keep that in mind. Even if an armor-damaging weapon doesn't destroy your armor immediately, you might not be able to stop them from destroying it if you don't go and stop them with snipers. Speaking of snipers, the non-armor-piercing sniper has no luck against it whatsoever. And the ordinary machine gun can barely even hit the fort, much less deal damage to armor. So it really is mostly for shooting down mortar shells and swarm missiles and warheads and such. Speaking of mortars, unupgraded fire mortars can deal damage to armor, just not very much and not accurately. It's mostly an extra repair cost that might not even be worth shooting down. If you're up against armored forts, you want to upgrade the mortars as soon as you can. Yeah, even if they hit the same piece of armor, it's really not of much threat. Another thing I wanted to talk about was a very important omission, which is the missile silos. They are very important to analyze because every time you install one, in most maps you're sacrificing a slot for a resource mine. So let's see how well this does. One missile silo is probably not enough to take down armor pieces. It might be a different story if used in conjunction with gatlings and such, but on its own, not really. Now, if you combine two of them, things get a little bit more interesting. One of the problems with swarm missiles is that although you can direct their general direction, they spread out really far from each other. Which means that if your opponent uses short armor pieces, you're unlikely to destroy any particular one, especially at short distances. I think that they become more accurate from further away because on a different map that I used, they seem to have fairly good reliability in destroying a single piece of armor. On a map like this, though, even a longer piece will often survive. The good news is that this is the only piece of weaponry that can effectively damage armor when you only have the workshop installed. Now, I was actually surprised when the first salvo didn't destroy the long piece because, once again, in my previous experiences, they usually did. In this case, though, any kind of machine gun defense would probably keep the armor pieces safe enough. So once again, sniper superiority is very important. But what if you have both a workshop and an upgrade station and start throwing warheads around? Well, let's take a look. Well, it destroys one piece of armor immediately, and look at that area of effect damage. It's pretty strong, too. And, in fact, the damage radius is wider than the repair radius of the repair command, which kind of surprised me. So, especially when used with the follow-up, you can get the results of a factory class weapon without having to wait for a factory if you can manage to get those missiles through without being shot down. So, this is very unlikely to happen in an actual game, but what if you land two warheads at a structurally important part of their base? It turns out that happens. Well, and that's the other strength of warheads. They will often damage important things past the armor protection. And they're already prepared to fire again. Well, I believe that's it for the video. I'm always open to feedback. Please let me know if there's something additional you'd like to see, or if there's something you'd like me to adjust about the video presentation. I'd love to hear from the viewers. Well,